Here is the overview of the double materiality visualization that we have in the software. A first note is that this specific data you see here is dummy data. This is not a real company's assessment results, and I have explicitly massaged this data in order to show the various kind of permutations and results. We will look potentially at a real example at the end of this video. At the top here of this visualization, you can see the dashboard, and this is just an indication of the progress of the assessment. You can see we have 21 impacts that have been identified in this assessment, 6 risks which have been identified, and 7 opportunities which have been identified. Below those, we can see the progress of how many of each were found to be material, how many have been found to be immaterial, and how many are yet to be assessed. So we can see that this assessment is nearly complete. There are 3 impacts which remain unassessed, and everything else has already been assessed. The dashboard at the top is mainly for preparers to use as a progress indicator. This is not probably the kind of information that would be relevant in the sustainability statement. What is more interesting for the sustainability statement is the graph visualization below. The graph below then is quite obviously a stacked bar chart, and perhaps the first thing that sustainability practitioners might notice is that this is not a matrix representation of materiality in any way. I've made previous videos about why I think the matrix is not appropriate now in terms of double materiality, and this is the alternative that we propose in lieu of a matrix. Along the x-axis, you can see all of the ESRS topical standards listed, starting with ESRS E1 climate change at the far left, and going all the way through the environment topics, moving through the social topics, and ending with ESRS G1, the governance topic, business conduct, at the far right. On the y-axis, we see a count. This is a raw count in numerical terms of the negative impacts shown in yellow, the positive impacts shown in green, the risks, the financial risks shown in red, and the financial opportunities shown in purple. It should be noted that these are raw counts, which means they don't show the relative severity or prioritization between material IROs, but we'll come back to that point a little bit later in the video. Let's then look at the ways that we think this representation is helpful and how this can be deployed both internally within your organization and externally in your published reporting. The first and perhaps the most obvious information that this visualization conveys is the topics which are material and the topics which are not material. Any topic which has an IRO above the line is a material topic, and any topic which has no IROs showing is not a material topic. So this is a fairly simple, highest level interpretation of this visual. As you can see, there are 7 material topics: climate change, pollution, biodiversity, circular economy, own workforce, workers in the value chain, and business conduct. And at this stage of this nearly complete assessment, there are 3 non-material topics: water and marine resources, affected communities, and consumers and end users. So that is the very first high-level interpretation of this data: which topics are material and which topics are not material. The second layer of information which this visual conveys is the spread of materiality between those topics that are material for impact reasons, those that are material for financial reasons, and those that are material for a combination of the two. As you can see, the pollution topic here has 2 impacts which are material, and we know straight away that that entire topic then is only material for impact reasons. Conversely, if we look at climate change, we can see there are 2 material risks and 2 material negative impacts. This topic is material for both financial reasons and for impact reasons. On the far right of the graph, you can see the business conduct topic. This has one material opportunity and one material risk. This topic is material only for financial reasons. So we can make these same judgments about all of the topics, which are material for impact reasons and which are material for financial reasons. We can go one step further and we can look at the relative weight of the raw numbers of IROs. And so if we look at the own workforce topic, we can see that while it is material for both financial and impact reasons, the materiality is being dominated by impacts. There are 5 material impacts, both positive and negative, and there are 2 material opportunities. So we know here that the weight of the materiality across the entire topic is heavier impact than it is financial. Now, this specific piece of information can be a little misleading because it is always entirely possible that a single IRO will be so substantial in terms of maybe severity or in terms of magnitude for the risks and opportunities, that it will be more important from an actions perspective or from a planning perspective than all of the other ones combined. And that is the drawback of this kind of visualization, is it's not showing any relative importance or contribution between the material IROs. It is my opinion, though, that the weighting or prioritization of any material IROs is really something that can be and should be handled after the materiality process. And that is also something that would become much more apparent in the sustainability itself, which is where companies are expected to describe how they are responding to the material IROs, and then those material IROs which are significantly more severe than the others or have higher magnitudes would be reflected with a greater level of organizational response. What this can do, though, is it can inform you of the relative weight of information that might be reported in the sustainability statement. So taking the own workforce topic, we can see that it is likely, while it's not a one-to-one correlation, it is likely that the bulk of the reported information is going to be concerned with these impacts. Whereas when we look at the workers in the value chain topic, here we're seeing that the bulk of the information that is reported is probably going to be financial, that is relating to these opportunities and the risks, which outweigh the raw number of impacts 2 to 1. So we need to be very careful about interpreting too deeply here because we are dealing with raw counts of IROs. But I think we can draw some general conclusions specifically about the reporting effort and the kinds of reporting information that will be in the sustainability statement as it pertains to those things that are financial versus those things that are impact. One additional information set that is conveyed by this is in the form of a sense check. And what I mean by that is, if you know through your experience and through your professional judgment that your specific business model or your specific value chain is dominated by certain risks or certain impacts in certain topics, you can quickly use this visualization to sense check how your materiality assessment results have come out. For example, if your business is almost entirely marine related and you are doing lots of work in the marine area, perhaps over large parts of your region or even globally, and if you saw a very small number of IROs which were material in that topic relative to the other topics, that might trigger not necessarily a reassessment, but that might trigger a review of why, one, IROs for that topic were not necessarily identified and assessed as material, or two, whether the thresholds and the descriptions of those IROs are appropriate. So this can act then as your sort of final sense check that the spread of IROs is somehow matching your business model and your value chain. Obviously, if lots of other entities who are very similar to yours were also producing the same kind of charts, then you could compare your results to the results of your peers to see if there were significant differences. And then you could decide whether that would result in any kind of review or update to either your materiality process or perhaps to the materiality processes that are being conducted by your peers. So while we're on the topic of reviewing the double materiality process, there is a second part to this visualization immediately below what you see here. And it's not visible right now because it does not relate to material IROs. And we know that material IROs, or information relating to material IROs, is that which should be focused on in the sustainability statement. So this is a nice chart to include somehow in the statement itself. However, if we're talking about reviewing the double materiality process, and I'm thinking more about audit and third-party assurance, then the non-material IROs are also relevant. And we can now show also the non-material IROs by clicking on the button to show on the right-hand side at the top of this visualization. Expanding the visualization out then to show non-material IROs, we can now see that there were a number which were identified. However, during the assessment process, these were found to be not material. And this kind of information can be as relevant for an auditor as the items which were found to be material. And we display these in the negative form in the same chart. So we have a negative space below the x-axis, and this is exactly the same information. It is a raw count of those IROs which were identified and assessed, but which were found to be not material. So I would caution against using the non-material information in a sustainability statement. We know that the requirements of the standard want us to focus information on that which is material and not to focus information on that which is non-material. So I wouldn't show the full expanded diagram necessarily in the sustainability statement, but I would have it available both internally as a review type visualization, perhaps something I could use to communicate with key stakeholders internally or the board of management, and something that could be used by auditors to help them sense check the process to see where the non-material IROs lay. As promised at the start of this video, we can now look at a real-life example of a double materiality assessment. And this assessment has been conducted by a small, medium-sized company based in Central Europe. And they have a very narrow and focused business model. They're producing a specific kind of product, and it is sort of light manufacturing, I guess you would say. And they have a very, very narrow inbound supply chain of a limited and narrow set of specific raw materials. And they produce a very standard set of products which end up going to retail. So this is not a sprawling global enterprise. This is something that is urban located and that is of a light industrial nature, and it is a small or relatively small business, a medium enterprise, let's say. So it's worth taking that into account if you're planning on judging the outcome of this assessment. You are obviously need to take into account the kind of nature of the business. Now, I can't say obviously who this is and exactly what they're doing because that would breach anonymity, but this is a real case. So let's take a look at the dashboard. What we can see here is around 60 or so IROs that have been identified. There is one impact yet to be assessed. On balance, about the same number of impacts as the total of risks and opportunities. And in fact, it's 36 of each. And that's purely coincidental. That wasn't planned to be that way, but it's turned out that the total of ROs, 36, is the same as the total number of impacts that were identified. When it comes to what's material, we'll see that the impacts were more likely to be material. There are 28 material impacts out of the 36 that were identified, whereas we only see 3 material risks and one I think that is material opportunity. So whilst a number of risks and opportunities were identified, most of them fell below the materiality threshold. However, a vast majority of impacts were above the materiality threshold. We can then skip into the bulk of the assessment. So we'll start off just looking at the material IROs. As you can see, there are a couple of topics for which there are no material IROs. And here we're looking at biodiversity and ecosystems, affected communities, and S for consumers and end users. Now, at first glance, when you think industry, we instantly want to think about the biodiversity impacts, and it might be a surprise then that there are no material biodiversity IROs. However, looking a bit closer, we can see that there are material pollution and water and marine resource material impacts. So we may be capturing the impacts that you might expect on biodiversity and ecosystems. Those secondary ones may be being captured through the primary impacts on the environment through pollution and depletion of resources already. As you would expect, climate change is material. I don't think there will be any companies in the world for whom climate change will not be a material topic. And in fact, we have a methodology which makes it almost impossible for climate change to be non-material if any IROs are assessed in good faith. As one would expect, own workforce is material and has the single largest number of material IROs. And for a business that is dealing in resources, raw materials in and finished materials out, then we also see circular economy as being one of the material topics with a large count. I think this is a fairly reasonable spread for what I would expect from a small, medium enterprise of this nature. And I think the sustainability statement that is produced as a result of this is going to be something that matches the business model they have, which is the whole purpose of double materiality. We can now look at the non-material IROs beneath the line. And here we see a similar spread to the material topics. So those things which were identified tend to be in the same topics as those which were material. However, we see about a 50-50 split. About half of the IROs ended up being material and half ended up being not material in approximately the same topics. However, as we know, it was largely the financial ROs which turned out to be not material, and it wasn't the impact. So for the most part, the impacts tended to be material. It is worth noting also that a couple of the topics which are not material, so that is biodiversity, ecosystems, and the consumers and end users, that there were impacts identified. However, they were not assessed to be material. Now, we could argue all day about whether they identified enough of those, and that would be the job for an auditor to go through and just check that they hadn't, let's say, misidentified something, misdescribed something, or not identified something that should have been assessed. And that is also where this kind of graph becomes instantly helpful, as we can quickly scan the raw numbers of IROs that were identified as well as those that were found to be material, and we can make quick judgments about whether we think there's anything missing that, on the exercise of that judgment, maybe should be reviewed. So I actually think this kind of visualization is extremely helpful for reviewing the entire process from an audit perspective when we're showing the non-material IROs, and for a communications perspective when we are looking at the material IROs. So that concludes this video. We are working on further visualizations of the double materiality assessment. This is just the first one we've managed to get into the software and working, but we have a few more surprises around the corner. So if you're interested in looking at how our software is assisting companies with their double materiality assessment, feel free to get in touch with me directly or go to the Code Gaia website and you can book a demo. I also want to encourage people to comment and engage on these specific visualizations. We know this sort of thing is never perfect, but we think this is a step in the right direction that reflects more of the specifics of ESRS double materiality, and it is stepping forward beyond the old-fashioned matrix type displays. So feel free to engage in the comments here on the YouTube video, and let's keep improving the process across the market and see where it leads.